If you've quietly decided that the version of love you wanted, the real, steady, actually works kind, simply isn't available to you anymore because of your age, your history, or how many times it's already gone wrong, I want to stop you right there. Because that belief isn't a fact. It's a story, and it's one of the most common stories men tell themselves in their 50s and 60s, and it happens to be almost completely wrong. Here's what the actual research says, and it's more encouraging than most men ever hear. The parts of you that got hurt, that learned to protect yourself, that developed the exact patterns keeping you stuck now, aren't permanent. They were built by experience, which means they can be rebuilt by experience too, at any age, including this one. The idea that your capacity for real connection was fixed by the time you turn 30 is one of the more damaging myths floating around, and it's simply not how the mind actually works. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why it's not too late, what the science actually says about change at this stage of life, and what building something real genuinely requires, which is less dramatic and more achievable than you probably think. Let's start with the belief that does the most damage, because it's rarely said out loud but it runs underneath almost everything else. The quiet assumption that however you learn to handle closeness, trust, and vulnerability back in your 20s or 30s is simply who you are now, permanently, and there's no real point trying to change it at this stage. Psychologists who study attachment, how people learn to handle closeness and trust based on their early relationships, used to think something close to that themselves. The pattern you developed early, the theory went, was largely the pattern you'd carry for life. But decades of follow-up research complicated that picture considerably. Researchers tracking adults over long stretches of time kept finding something the original theory didn't predict. A meaningful portion of people who started out with anxious or avoidant patterns, shaped by difficult or inconsistent early relationships, ended up securely attached as adults anyway. Not because their childhood retroactively improved. Because later experiences, a steady relationship, a good friendship, sometimes therapy, gave their nervous system new evidence that closeness didn't have to mean danger. Researchers have a name for this. Earned security. And it's not some rare exception reserved for the lucky few. Studies estimate a substantial portion of securely attached adults actually started out insecure and built their way there through accumulated experience. That number matters enormously for anyone who's assumed their patterns were locked in decades ago. It means the brain keeps updating its expectations about relationships throughout the entire lifespan, not just in childhood, and it means the update doesn't require some rare stroke of luck. It requires enough repeated experience that contradicts the old expectation, closeness that turns out to be safe instead of threatening, often enough that the nervous system finally stops flinching. Here's the part worth sitting with directly. This isn't about erasing your history or pretending your past relationships didn't shape you. It's the opposite. The path to earned security runs directly through making sense of that history, understanding what it taught you and why, rather than trying to skip past it towards some clean slate that was never actually on offer. Your capacity for real connection was never fixed. It was just waiting for enough new evidence to update, and the only reason it hasn't updated yet is that most men never give it the chance, because they've already decided the update isn't possible. There's a specific mechanism worth understanding here, because it makes the whole idea feel less abstract. The nervous system doesn't update through insight alone. Understanding why you flinch at a certain kind of closeness, intellectually, in a single therapy session or a single moment of clarity, rarely changes the flinch itself. What actually changes it is repetition. The same kind of closeness showing up again and again without the danger your body is braced for actually materializing. Eventually the prediction updates, not because you decided it should, but because the evidence finally outweighed the old expectation. That's not a quick fix. It's closer to how a muscle rebuilds after an injury, slow, repetitive, and largely invisible while it's actually happening. Now here's a reframe that changes how the rest of this conversation lands, so it's worth getting right before moving on. Men who've been through a divorce, a long relationship that ended badly, or simply years of dating that never quite worked, tend to describe what they're carrying as baggage, damage, wear and tear that makes them a worse candidate for something real than they were at 25. That framing feels honest in the moment, but it's actually backwards, and understanding why matters more than it might seem. Every failed relationship, examined honestly instead of just endured, is information. It tells you something specific about what you actually need, what you can't tolerate, what patterns you fall into under stress, and what you're genuinely capable of when things get hard instead of easy. A 25-year-old hasn't collected that information yet. He's operating on guesses, hopes, and whatever he picked up from watching other people's relationships from the outside. You've run actual experiments. Some of them failed, which is exactly how you know what doesn't work, in a way theory alone could never have taught you. The distinction that matters is what you did with the failure afterward. There's a real difference between a man who examined what went wrong and adjusted, and a man who simply absorbed the pain and built higher walls around himself as protection. Both men carry the same history. Only one of them is carrying it as data he can actually use. The other is carrying it as a wound he's still organizing his whole life around avoiding a repeat of, which tends to produce exactly the kind of guardedness that makes real connection harder to reach, not easier. This is worth being honest with yourself about directly, because the two paths look similar from a distance but lead somewhere completely different. Ask yourself what you actually learned from what went wrong before, specifically, not just that it hurt. What pattern were you playing a part in? What would you actually do differently now, not in theory, but in the next real conversation where the same dynamic starts to show up? If you can answer that clearly, you're carrying data. If the honest answer is that you've mostly just been protecting yourself from feeling that particular pain again, that's worth naming too, because protection and preparation aren't the same thing, even though they can feel identical from the inside. There's a practical version of this worth trying, and it doesn't require reliving anything painful to do it. Take one past relationship that ended badly and write down, honestly, 3 things about how you showed up in it that you'd genuinely do differently now, not 3 things she did wrong. That distinction matters enormously. Cataloging her mistakes teaches you nothing usable going forward, because you can't control another person's behavior in the next relationship any more than you could in the last one. Cataloging your own patterns, the ones that are actually yours to change, is the only version of this exercise that produces anything you can carry forward. So, quick pause here, because this next part is where the actual barrier usually lives, and it's rarely the one men assume it is. Most men who've quietly given up on building something real tell themselves it's a numbers problem, or an age problem, or a market problem, whatever version of that story feels least uncomfortable to sit with. The real obstacle, more often than not, is something much less dramatic and much more within their control. Avoidance, dressed up as realism. Here's how it actually works, and it's worth recognizing because the pattern is remarkably consistent. A man gets hurt badly enough once, or repeatedly enough over the years, that some part of him decides the safest move is to stop actually trying, while still telling himself and everyone else that he hasn't given up, just gotten realistic. He stays on dating apps he never really uses. He says yes to the idea of meeting someone while consistently avoiding the actual situations where that might happen. He tells himself the odds are bad, the good ones are all taken, it's different at this age, and each of those stories feels true in the moment because they're doing exactly the job they're designed to do, protecting him from the risk of trying honestly and getting hurt again. The problem with this strategy, and it is a strategy even when it doesn't feel like one, is that it guarantees the exact outcome it's supposedly protecting against. If you never actually put yourself in a position to build something real, the belief that it's too late becomes true, not because it was ever actually true, but because you made sure it would be. That's not fate. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy, quietly constructed and then mistaken for evidence. The way out of this isn't a burst of motivation or a single dramatic decision to change everything overnight. It's smaller and less glamorous than that. It's noticing the next specific moment you're about to avoid, a conversation, an invitation, a small vulnerable admission, and choosing to actually show up instead of finding the reasonable-sounding excuse that would let you quietly opt out again. Avoidance rarely announces itself as avoidance. It shows up wearing the costume of good judgment, and learning to tell the difference is most of the actual work. There's a specific tell worth watching for in your own thinking, because it's remarkably consistent once you know to look for it. Genuine realism about the odds tends to come with curiosity attached, a willingness to actually test the assumption against real evidence. Avoidance dressed as realism tends to come with relief instead, a quiet sense of being let off the hook the moment the excuse lands. If deciding it's probably too late feels more like comfort than disappointment, that's usually the signal that something is being protected rather than assessed. Here's a piece of this that trips up a lot of men once they've actually decided to try again, because the phrase itself sets an expectation that isn't accurate. Starting over sounds like it means beginning from nothing, wiping the slate clean and hoping this time goes better than the last. That's not what actually happens, and treating it that way sets you up for a kind of exhaustion that isn't necessary. You're not starting from zero. You're starting from everything you've already built, the self-knowledge, the pattern recognition, the ability to spot in the first few conversations what might have taken you months to notice at 25. What's actually required isn't erasing that foundation. It's staying open enough to let new experience update it, instead of using it as a fixed verdict on what's possible. This is the part where a lot of men accidentally sabotage themselves without meaning to. They approach a new relationship already braced for the old pattern to repeat, scanning early conversations for the first sign of the specific thing that hurt them last time, and often finding it, or something close enough to it, because that's what a mind primed to look for danger tends to find. The nervous system doesn't distinguish well between genuine risk and old risk it's still flinching at. Both feel identical in the moment, which means the very caution meant to protect you can end up recreating the exact dynamic you were trying to avoid, simply by treating a new person as though they're guilty of an old crime before they've had the chance to prove otherwise. The actual skill here isn't lowering your guard recklessly. It's learning to notice when you're reacting to this specific person in front of you, and when you're reacting to a ghost from a decade ago wearing her face for a moment. That distinction takes practice, and it's uncomfortable practice, because it means sitting with uncertainty a little longer than instinct wants to, giving someone new the chance to actually be different before deciding they aren't. Most men who successfully build something real later in life describe exactly this shift, not a moment of finally being fixed, but a gradual willingness to let new evidence outweigh old fear, one interaction at a time. A useful habit here is simply naming the reaction out loud, even just to yourself, in the moment it happens. Noticing a flash of suspicion or withdrawal and asking directly, "Is this about her, or is this about someone else entirely?" gives the newer, calmer part of your thinking a chance to weigh in before the older reflex takes over the whole decision. It won't work every time at first. It gets easier with repetition, the same way almost everything in this video does, because very little of this is about a single insight and almost all of it is about what you practice consistently once the insight has already landed. Last piece, and it's the one that reframes this whole topic away from something that happens to you towards something you actually build. There's a version of this story men tell themselves that makes the whole thing feel like luck, waiting for the right person to simply appear, at which point everything clicks into place effortlessly. That version isn't how real relationships actually work, at any age, and believing it sets you up to miss something worth building because it didn't arrive with fireworks attached. What actually works looks considerably more ordinary than that, and understanding what it actually looks like matters more than any single piece of advice about finding it. Real connection, the kind that holds up over years rather than months, gets built through a long accumulation of small, unglamorous moments. Showing up consistently instead of only when it's convenient. Actually listening instead of waiting for your turn. Handling a disagreement without either collapsing or attacking. Being honest about something uncomfortable instead of letting it quietly fester. None of that happens in a single grand gesture. It happens in the fourth ordinary Tuesday, and the 40th, repeated often enough that trust accumulates the way savings accumulate, slowly, unglamorously, and almost invisibly until you look back and realize how much has actually been built. This is genuinely good news, even though it doesn't feel as exciting as the alternative. It means building something real was never about being young enough, lucky enough, or undamaged enough. It's about showing up consistently for the unglamorous work, which is a skill that tends to improve with age rather than decline, precisely because you've had more practice with consistency, patience, and follow-through than you had decades ago, whether you've given yourself credit for that or not. The men who build something real later in life aren't the ones who got lucky. They're the ones who kept showing up long enough for the ordinary Tuesdays to add up into something worth calling real. It's worth saying plainly that this isn't a fast process, and expecting it to be is its own way of setting yourself up for disappointment. Trust, in any relationship, tends to build on a timeline measured in months and years, not weeks, and a man expecting proof of something real within the first few dates is applying the wrong yardstick entirely. The patience required here isn't passive waiting. It's active, ongoing effort, sustained past the point where the outcome feels guaranteed, which is exactly the quality that separates the men who eventually build something real from the men who gave up one ordinary Tuesday too early, right before the accumulation would have started to show. So here's the honest version of this, laid out plainly instead of wrapped in either false optimism or quiet resignation. Your capacity for connection was never fixed by your past. It updates throughout your entire life given the right experience. Your history isn't baggage weighing you down, it's data, if you're willing to actually examine it instead of just carrying the weight of it. The real obstacle usually isn't your age or the odds. It's avoidance disguised as realism, quietly guaranteeing the outcome it claims to be protecting you from. Starting over doesn't mean starting from zero. It means staying open enough to let new evidence update what you already know. And what's real gets built through ordinary, unglamorous consistency, not discovered fully formed in a single lucky moment. None of this requires you to be someone you're not, or to somehow undo the years that already happened. It just requires showing up honestly for the next ordinary moment instead of deciding in advance that it's already too late to matter. It isn't. It never actually was.